Senator Rhiannon, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Murdoch. Could you just outline what submissions have been received from the Victorian Government that cover transport projects?
Submissions? Sorry, Senator, how do you mean?
Well, what requests for assistance, what projects have been floated with you, however you interact with Victoria outside the East-West link? Can you outline what other transport projects are on the books in any way?
Certainly, we have an ongoing engagement with Victorian officials, and the Victorian Government has made a number of submissions to the Australian Government in relation to future investment programs. Obviously, as you're aware, the Government made a series of commitments in the state of Victoria in the lead up to the last federal election, and subsequent to that, the Victorian Government has put forward a number of proposals for changes and variations to the investment program, which have been reflected in this year's budget with a number of key decisions. In the budget this year, the Government has announced its commitment to the East-West link, both Stage 1 and Stage 2. The Government has also made some announcements in relation to a significant rail level crossing projects in Albans, and also some other variations to the program that have...
So the question was what Victoria has put to the Government. So what else have you received apart from East-West, please?
Well, in relation to those other projects, we've also received project proposals, or at least indicative project information in relation to all of the Victorian projects which appear in the program as announced in the budget.
So things like, Senator, the duplication of the Princess Highway, for example.
So everything in the budget is what you've received from Victoria. There's nothing additional. So you're saying everything's in the budget?
Well, all of the projects that have been agreed with Victoria...
No, I know agreed, but no, the question was, has the Victorian Government put forward any other transport projects?
That are not reflected in the budget? Well, clearly, like all jurisdictions, they have a list of projects they'd like to receive Commonwealth funding for.
Right, so can you release those, please?
I'd have to take that on notice. There are clearly a long list of projects that each jurisdiction would like to see Commonwealth funding to.
Okay, so if you could take that on notice.
Certainly.
Thank you. And just going back to what we were talking about before with regard to the business case, when you do receive it for the East-West, will that be publicly available?
That will be a matter ultimately for Victorian Government and Infrastructure Australia, depending on the nature of it. But certainly the Government has indicated that in terms of, it certainly sees in the future that as much as possible Infrastructure Australia's assessment and material will be made publicly available, provided they are not matters which go to commercial in confidence that might affect procurement processes and the like. Yes.
So that's your understanding, Mr Fitzgerald?
Yes, that is, I have the same understanding.
So is that the usual practice, that it's released publicly?
The Government has, as part of its reforms to Infrastructure Australia, is looking for a greater level of transparency around the publication of materials. To this point, Infrastructure Australia has published its priority list, as well as in the last few years provided benefit cost ratios against projects that are all available on its website.
So the question was, though, about the business case. Is it the usual practice that the business case for a project that IA is involved in is publicly released?
It's not been the usual case.
It's not. So it hasn't happened in the past?
Information has been released, and Infrastructure Australia's website contains details of many projects, including their assessment. In the future, the Government has made a commitment to increase the amount of information that is available once the assessments have taken place, yes.
But not the full business case? That commitment hasn't been given? It
will depend on... There may be elements of the business case which are not publicly released, where the Victorian Government or other state governments or territory governments wish to those matters not be publicly released because they may affect the procurement process that they have underway. For instance, information such as patronage forecasts and the like may not be released in full because they may form part of a commercial negotiation with a PPP proponent. So in those situations you may not publish all of the information, but certainly as far as possible the Government is seeking to increase the amount of information available.
And who makes that decision on what will be released?
Ultimately it would be Infrastructure Australia and the Australian Government if the material was provided to the Government.
So ultimately the Minister?
Well, ultimately Infrastructure Australia Council, in the first instance, would make judgments based on advice they receive from the proponents of the project.
I thought you just said and the Government.
Well, where information is provided separately to the Government could choose, and I think may increasingly choose to provide that information publicly.
But you're saying they can't, IA can make their decision independently?
IA can make their own judgments based on based on the request from the proponents as to what information can be made available.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I think the actors both, I'm happy to say throw to Senator Conroy.
Now? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Just returning back to